the co-owner of this fine establishment, and today we are celebrating heat! Who loves heat? Woo! I love heat! Yes! Who is in heat? I love heat! Who loves the sun? Who has a sun? Who is a sun? Who loves the heat? It's the heat event. We're celebrating the end of summer. It's really hot. It's not going to end. Even after summer ends, it will continue to be hot, and we will love it. So to begin with, someone who wrote a book called Bad Connections. We have it for sale. He loves heat. He loves yachts. He has 3 of them. One of them is called I Love Heat. It's a bad name of a yacht. Ryan C. Bradley, come on up. Woo!
Ryan! How y'all doing today? Can y'all hear me?
Oh yeah.
So I've been kind of down lately. A lot of you probably know I'm from Connecticut. I know most of y'all. And my summer has been kind of ruined. I've had to dry dock my yacht before the summer has ended so I could weigh in on the raging debate over student loan forgiveness. The discourse is framed as 2 sides. That of the patriots, those brave individuals who repaid their loans in full, not neglecting a single cent of the interest, and know that it would be wrong for anyone else not to do exactly the same. On the other side, there are those anti-American cowards, the blubbering fools saying that they made 10 years of payments, nearly double what they took out, but because of so-called predatory practices, now owe more than when they got out of school, so they shouldn't have to pay. But that model leaves out the most important person in this discussion. The freak mutant amalgam of 3 women, 2 men, and a miniature Clydesdale horse, which I named Dale. You might be asking yourself, what student loan debt payments have to do with Dale or me? With his 13 legs and 7.5 arms, you'd think that Dale would be able to provide for his own food. But it turns out having 6 brains and wildly different length limbs, Dale doesn't move very well at all. And one of them, the man, was previously known as Robert, is a vegetarian. And he uses the 3.5 arms he controls to swat away any meat the other base beings try to put in their shared stomach. That means somebody's got to pay for all the unidentifiable nutrient slop we give Dale to make him strong. We've also got to pay for soundproofing to hide the squabbling between Robert and Melinda. Those are 2 of the other heads, because the things they're saying make the sailors on my yacht blush. And speaking of that, there's another group of people left out of the student loan debt forgiveness debate. I've got a full-time crew on all 3 of my yachts, and if someone reneges on our deal, that's who's going to bear the brunt of it. A deck swab out of work because those damn college kids don't want to keep paying off the debt they agreed to at 18 at 45. You could say, I think, with a great degree of accuracy, that those in favor of student loan forgiveness must hate the working class because they don't want me to be rich enough to pay them anymore. And in case there's any confusion, I've done more than my share of hard work to earn the money I used to create Dale and buy my 2nd and 3rd yacht. I will be forthcoming that the first yacht was an 18th birthday gift from my parents. I had worked my way up through the ranks from CFO to CEO, a position I earned after my father retired to focus on his true passion, lobbying against environmental protections. Do you know how many people have been able to make that jump from the C-suite to higher in the C-suite? Neither do I, but I bet it's not a lot. And I bet I'm the only one who went home every night drawing up my plans to make Dale, who has 8 distinct sets of genitalia and a 9th lacking definition, where we're pretty sure that's what it is. Because we're scientists. And the beauty of science is that we're all about pushing to the next horizon. Nobody knows what it'll lead to, but it'll only happen if I cancel my summer vacation early, dry dock my yacht, and push against the student loan debt forgiveness. Think of me, the Nepo baby who inherited his father's serfdom. Think of the deck swabs we put out of work. And think of Dale, who needs his nutrient slop hosed into each of his mouses to stay alive. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi!
Next up, we have Celso Hurtado.
Okay. Hey, have you guys ever heard of the Melted Man? I stared at Mike, annoyed. All he'd done all day while they shot baskets in his backyard was try to scare them. And it was way too hot to deal with his bullshit. But Steve, a neighborhood kid a few years younger than them, took the bait. "Who's the Melted Man?" he asked. "The Melted Man," Mike said, "started out as this guy who lived here in Texas. He was always complaining about how hot it was, that it felt like he was melting. But no one ever believed it. And then one day he passed out in his backyard from the heat, and his skin literally melted, and he died in a puddle of his own flesh." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," I said. "For one thing, skin doesn't melt. It blisters and peels and stuff." "Well," Mike said, "for the purpose of this summer-themed story, we're just going to say that skin melts." "What does the Melted Man do?" Steve asked. "Good question," Mike said. "He's so pissed off at what happened to him that now he haunts anyone who complains about the heat at least 3 times in less than 2 minutes. "At least 3 times in less than 2 minutes is pretty specific," I said. "I don't know, what do you want from me? That's just how the Melted Man does it." "Anyway, if you complain about the heat too much, he'll show up and melt your skin so that you'll look just like him." "That still doesn't make any sense," I said. "People complain about the heat all the time and nothing happens to them." "Well," Mike said, "he doesn't have time to haunt everybody. It's like playing Russian roulette. He might have time for you, he might not." "Those people who complain about the summer heat all the time are annoying," Steve said. "I mean, what do you expect? We're in Texas." "To be fair," I said, it is always warm as balls around here." "Wait, isn't the same cold as balls?" Mike asked. "Yeah, but balls are warm. Cold as balls doesn't make any sense, so I've been trying to start a movement to change the same." "Oh, I forgot to mention," Mike said, "the Melted Man can also be summoned and will melt the skin off whoever you tell them to, providing that this person complained about the heat at least 3 times in less than 2 minutes." "I want to summon him," Steve said. "There's this kid at school who never shuts up about how hot it is. How do you call it?" "Easy," Mike said. "All you say is, 'God damn, it's hot as shit,' and then say the Melted Man's name 5 times. I laughed. 5 times? That's just a straight-off rip-off of Candyman." "Bullshit," Mike said. "What, Candyman is the only vengeful spirit who knows his own name?" "Candyman doesn't have a monopoly on recognizing when someone is calling him. In fact, we should just go ahead and summon him right now." "But no one here has complained about the heat at least 3 times in less than 2 minutes," Steve said. "It's all bullshit anyway," I said. "Well, prove it," Mike said. "Complain about the heat, then we'll summon him and see what happens." I knew with certainty that none of this was true, of course, but a flutter in my belly warned me against doing it. "Come on," Mike said, "unless you're scared." "Fine," I said, wanting to get the whole thing over with so we can go back to playing basketball. "It's hot." "Good," Mike said. "And?" "It's sweltering," I said. "And?" I hesitated for a few moments, but finally said, "It's warm as balls." Mike grinned as he leaned in closer. "All right then, let's do this." I rolled my eyes but couldn't shake the unease tightening my chest. I glanced over at Steve, who looked both nervous and excited, eyes wide and glued to Mike. Mike cleared his throat and stood up straight. "God damn, it's hot as shit," he said. "Melted Man, Melted Man, Melted Man, Melted Man." He stopped and winked at me, a grin still on his face. "Melted Man." Silence. The 3 of us stood in the backyard, the only sound the faint buzzing of insects and low hum of the neighbor's air conditioner struggling against the oppressive heat. Nothing happened, of course. Steve let out a nervous laugh. I guess it was just a story. Mike shrugged, looking disappointed. "Guess the Melted Man's on vacation. Maybe it's too hot even for him." "Whatever," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "I'm getting some water." As I headed back to the house, something shifted. The air seemed to thicken around me, the heat becoming almost unbearable, pressing down like a smothering blanket. I glanced back at Mike and Steve, who were oblivious. "Hey, you guys feel that?" I asked. "Feel what?" Steve said. I struggled to find the right words. It wasn't just hot anymore. It was suffocating, like the air itself was boiling. Sweat poured out of me. Mike's smile faded, replaced with a look of concern. "Dude, you okay? You look like you're about to pass out." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. The heat was unbearable now. a blistering sensation that seemed to be coming from inside. That's when the melted man appeared, seeming to manifest right out of the sweltering air. His skin was hideously deformed, hanging in twisted folds, congealed in strange, unnatural ways. One eye sagged lower than the other, his mouth a crooked line that stretched too wide. The skin on his hands was slick and shiny, like wax that had been left too close to a flame. He moved awkwardly, limbs stiff and jerky, but his uneven eyes were sharp and focused. I wanted to run, but it was as if the air itself had thickened, trapping me in place. The melted man moved toward Mike and Steve, his fleshy mouth opening and closing, making a wet, raspy sound. Mike and Steve's faces turned crimson. They must have felt the same blistering heat coming from the melted man as I was. "It's so hot, it burns. I can't take the heat, I'm burning up." The two of them babbled almost incoherently. "No," I said, "stop. That's more than 3 complaints in less than 2 minutes." But it was too late. The melted man howled in victory. They then held his deformed hands out towards Mike and Steve. They fell to their knees, hands clawing at their faces, newly charred skin peeled off in gooey strips, their eyes dripping out of their sockets. "Help me!" they both tried to scream in garbled voices, their mouths a twisted mess of melting flesh. "This isn't real," I said, trying to convince myself. But it was real. Mike and Steve's skin continued to melt, their features sliding downward. I watched as they both tried to hold on to various pieces sliding off their face. I backed away, trembling. But now the melted man turned his attention my way. The air seemed to shimmer and twist around me. The grass underneath my feet wilted, turning black in just seconds. I tried to run, but the heat pressed down on me, growing heavier, hotter with every step. I stumbled, my vision blurring, skin prickling with unbearable searing pain. I fell to the ground, just as the first drop of sweat turned to blood. That's it.
As Phil Celso wrote 2 books, 2 whole books himself. Restaurants and The Devil's Promise. Woo! Yeah! Alright, that's 2 down already. Thank everybody. Thank you for coming out to this hot event. If it's okay with you guys, I would love to pitch this new product I'm trying to fund. So I was doing some research in the backstage a second ago, and I found out that humans sweat. They produce about anywhere from 5 to 10 liters of sweat a day. That's a lot of sweat that we'll just waste it. We just let it go, leave it behind, like teal drops. But not quite that. These are not sad things of waddle. They all just neutral, you know? So what I'm thinking is, how much do you spend at the grocery store for like a 2 liter of soda? I don't know. I've never bought one. $2, $5? What if we bottled this sweat and sold it? I mean, I know I would want one. Who would not? Because why would you want sweat? Okay, I got you. What if you were trying to impress somebody by how much you sweat? Like you wanted to pick somebody up, and the person you were trying to impress, they will only impress by like the amount you sweat. But you are someone who doesn't sweat much. So that's why you go, you always have on a 2 liter of sweat is on you. So you can be like, oh, you do a distraction, like, ah, what's that? And then quickly you get the 2 liter of sweat and just drench it on you. But it can't just be like spring water. It has to be sweat because this person is going to smell it, obviously. And they know the difference between spring water sweat and sweat. Anyway, John Baltisberger is coming.
On that note, Ryan invited me to this event, and I said, oh yeah, that sounds great, that sounds cool. And he said, it needs to be a story about the summer. And I was like, go fuck yourself.
You did say that.
I did. Very, I don't joke. But I was thinking about, like, what is the most horrifying part of the summer? The thing that sucks the most, and it's undoubtedly dealing with your HOA and your yard dying or going too fast during the summer. HOAs, right? Like, you can all agree they're history's greatest monster.
Boo!
So this is a letter. This is a letter I had to write to my neighborhood HOA. To whom it may concern, I can't believe I find myself in the insane position of emailing the HOA. While I know and understand that your main purview is making sure no one's grass is more than 3 inches high and that no one has rattan chairs on their front porch, I hope that you will also dedicate your time to mediating issues between residents, specifically between myself and fellow Onion Creek Crossing resident, the Prophet Moses. Now, I understand that Mr. Friend of God, former Prince of Egypt, is a high-profile member of our community. But I don't think that should give him some sort of status that puts him above the rest of our residents. For instance, the other day, my kid, playing in my backyard, accidentally knocked a soccer ball over the fence into Moses' yard. No big deal, right? It happens. Well, this dude completely lost his shit. He stormed out of his house, hair all crazy, shouting about how we were blaspheming against his petunias. He even grabbed this giant stone tablet from God knows where, literally, and waved it around saying, "We're making some new rules now, boy, to show you." I mean, it's kind of fun at first, you know? We had a wacky neighbor. It was like a sitcom. Well, let me tell you, the shine comes off that apple real fucking quick. They always show Tim Allen talking to his level-headed neighbor over the fence. What they don't show is the whole crisis from the neighbor's point of view. Like the time when Tim builds a hot rod and then the entire family reenacts Greased Lightning with Tim lip-syncing and fumbling through the choreography. That's a real episode, by the way. A real episode that Tim's neighbor, who I assume is just like the Hat Man, he had to sit and watch from his yard, wondering every minute what new nightmare would emerge from the garage, grunting like a constipated ape. That's what it's like living next to Moses, only like amped up to 1,000. 2 weeks ago, I see Moses is over there on his back porch staring into my yard. That's weird under the best of circumstances, but my daughter was out there in her swimsuit in the pool. So like, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable, right? That's normal. So I go to tell him, like, mind your eyes. And he goes ballistic. He starts screaming that I'm the one who's sinning and coveting, and then said that our dumb house and pool were an eyesore in the neighborhood because of all the blood. I am sure you're aware that I have always maintained my yard and home at a level that is aesthetically pleasing and in line with HOA regulations. So at first I was just like confused. I didn't understand. But then Tiffany starts screaming. I turn around, bam! All the water in my pool would turn to blood. Do you know how hard it is to drain a blood pool? How difficult it is to disinfect an entire swimming pool? He said he was going to summon a plague of flies too, but I'm sure he's full of shit and it was just all the human blood that attracted them. And then, because of all the goddamn flies, and again, I want to stress there were enough flies to blot out the sun. Because of all the flies, frogs started showing up. I haven't had a good night's sleep in days because even after I got used to the smell of blood everywhere, there were all these flies buzzing around. And the frogs are screaming their stupid heads off. No, I don't mean croaking. It's not normal croaking. They were screaming their fat asses off about the sins of humanity one by one. Yeah, dude, everyone knows that Veronica slept with Jake. We all know the final season of Lost was trash. Every single human on the planet already knows that wanting to fuck Steve Buscemi more than we've ever wanted anything else in our entire lives isn't exactly a sin, but it is sort of weird. But it's all we all fucking want in our life. We know that, frogs, so just shut up. Look, I know the good book as well as any nominally Christian, nominally white, nominally straight man with a nominal family that tries to follow the nominally moral rules of a nominal faith. I know that he's throwing a lot of the old hits at us. But where does it end? I don't want him to kill my livestock, which, I mean, I guess in this case, the squirrels. I don't have a son, so I'm probably okay there, but I don't want to take my chances. I'm asking for immediate mediation between myself and the prophet Moses. And if we can't find a civil solution for these disagreements, I'm going to have to take him to court. And I don't think anyone in our housing development wants that drama. At the end of the day, we're all trying to live our lives and be good neighbors. All I ask is that the HOAs take steps to dissuade any deities or their intermediaries from purposely causing drought, famine, or pestilence in my rose bushes. Thank you.
gonna do something unconventional. Who do you want to see read next? Pick a name. Bill C. Hausen? Also, introduce yourself and say what you wrote and stuff. All right.
RC and Baltisberger also have books on the table.
Yeah, they do. Yep, I'm R.C. Hausen. I wrote this one right here, Cosmovorous.
Woo!
I got another one coming out maybe March 2025 called Royal Jelly. And today I wrote a story called The Thing in the Basement. It takes place during the summer. Yeah, it'll work. I'm not your mother, you goddamn little rat. The woman had said this to little Eddie at least 3 times a day since he'd been sent to live with her. In the winter months, around what had passed for Christmas, it had carried the sting of rejection. Now he was numb to it. A callus of alienation had grown over his heart. He knew it was true anyway. His mother had been a woman with honey-brown skin. She'd smelt of cinnamon and vanilla. Her hair had been raven black and her eyes brimmed with love. This woman, Patty, her skin was sallow and pitted. She smelt of bottom-shelf gin, and her bloodshot eyes swam with venom. Little Eddie had learned to avoid her when she slipped into this diatribe. When she'd gotten this deep in the drink, it was best to be invisible. She used an extension cord for discipline, and it had tasted the flesh of little Eddie's back on several occasions. The last time he'd angered her, she went even further. He'd approached her in the kitchen to let her know that Donnie had pissed the bed again. Donnie was 10, and he actually was Patty's son. He had the tiny wide-set eyes common to fetal alcohol syndrome. He and Eddie shared a bed, and the boy constantly wet the mattress. That morning, Eddie had thought he was going to be a good little helper. His plan was to tell Patty about the mess and assist her with the cleanup. He'd barely gotten the words out before she spun around on him. He never saw the frying pan, but he felt the crack against his skull. Then darkness. He'd awoke hours later with a bandage wrapped around his head. It had been sticky with dried blood. His head had screamed with pain, and he felt like he wanted to puke. In the weeks that followed, little Eddie realized his brain didn't work the same way as before. He wondered if it ever would again. Now it all came so slow. He wasn't sure what that meant, but it made him sad. Now he knew when Patty started to slur her words, it was time to leave. As he made his way to the back of the house, he passed by the basement. Its black door stood monolithic in the hallway. The smell of ammonia hung heavy and acrid in the air. He pressed his back to the opposite wall and quickly slid by. The eye painted upon the door washed him from above as he snuck out the back. Outside, he was greeted by the heat of a San Antonio summer. He cut through a vacant lot of weeds and wildflowers and down an alleyway to wander the streets alone. He collected glass bottles from the trash cans and gutters. When he had an armful, he made his way to the corner store to return them for a deposit. The old man that ran the place was nice. He called Eddie young man instead of rat, and always gave him a little more candy than he had money for. Eddie wasn't there for candy today. On the shelf behind the counter was a silver AM/FM pocket radio. Little Eddie had been collecting bottles for over a month and returning them for store credit. He wasn't capable of the math necessary to determine when he had amassed enough funds, so he trusted the old man to let him know. Luckily, the old man was honest. After he collected the bottles from the counter, he punched some numbers into his calculator and smiled from behind his horn-rimmed glasses. "Looks like today is the day, young man." 10 minutes later, little Eddie was sitting under a dead oak tree on the edge of the vacant lot. He clenched the radio in his hands and eagerly worked the tuning dial with his fingers. Through the static, a burst of music. "Hot town, summer in the city, back of my neck getting dirty and gritty." He spent the afternoon amongst the tall grass listening to his radio. Later that evening, little Eddie crept in the back door of the house. The sun hung low in the west behind him. It painted the horizon dusty orange. The house was dark and his eyes slowly adjusted to the low light. He saw Kay standing in the hallway, standing at the basement door. Her shoulders slumped, her head drooped, and her jaw gone slack. The smell of ammonia permeated the hallway. Kay was Donnie's older sister. She too wore the features of fetal alcohol syndrome. She was the resident maid of the house, unless Big Ed was home from the road. Then she served other purposes. Little Eddie didn't like to think about that. On the nights when Kay crept back from Big Ed's room, little Eddie could hear her softly crying next door. Little Eddie whispered, "Kay, what are you doing? Where's Patty?" The girl slowly turned her head. Her eyes focused on him as the dreamy quality drained from her face. She's in the living room? With him? Little Eddie's stomach dropped. He knew if he'd came in through the front, he'd have seen Big Ed's rig parked in the street. Looks like he was home from the road, and that was never good. Little Eddie moved down the hall quietly. He stopped at the edge of the light cast in the living room and listened from the shadows. He could hear Patty's shrill voice. "Your little bastard's been gone all day." Big Ed chuckled, his voice as deep as rich molasses. "Don't pay little Eddie no mind. He'll be back when he's back. Are all the women in Mexico whores, or is it just the ones you fuck? And don't worry about his mama. She's with the angels. Besides, I'm more than a bit sour about you ruining that boy. He was meant for the basement. And you cracked him in the head with the frying pan and scrambled his egg. It don't take damaged goods, Patty. Part of the agreement is perfection. That's why Kay and Donnie aren't options. You know how long it took me to track Eddie down? Hell, I didn't know his mother came up from Monterey. Here I am traipsing all over Mexico, and he's right here in San Antonio. I find them, send his mother to the angels, and prepare him in the basement. Then you get a snoot full of gin, and bang, we don't have an offering. I've aged 5 years in 6 months, Patty. You have too. You notice that yellow in your eyes? You can't guzzle that gin without consequence if you don't make an offering. He took a sip of whiskey, then grinned at smug reflection. Luckily, I tracked down little Tina here. Her mama was in Shreveport, where I'd left her. Are they all whores in Shreveport, or just the ones you fuck? God damn, Patty, change the fucking record. She weren't no whore, just a stupid girl. Too naive to know who she was dealing with when she lay with me. After I seated her, she looked up at me and said, "Will you write me? Will you come back?" I told her I wasn't to let her write in kind, but I'd be back for her. Promise kept. I have reaped what I sowed. She is with the angels, and little Tina is here with me. I took her into the basement, and it was pleased, very pleased. Can't you smell? In 2 nights, we make our offering. Little Eddie leaned in closer to try and get a look at who Ed was talking about. The girl looked to be 6. She stood next to Big Ed's chair and stared at the ground. Her tiny hands shook. Big Ed's head jerked towards the hallway. "Eddie, I see you over there sneaking around like a little rat. Get over here, son. I want to talk to you." Little Eddie swallowed and shuffled forward. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry." "Boy, what if I told you about that sorry shit? We don't apologize. Our kind never does. Meet your half-sister, Tina. Don't get attached. In 2 days, she's going into the basement." Big Ed tilted his head and grinned. The light fell across his face and his skin gleamed sinister. This is like a nightmare. There we go.
Why are you in your underwear?
Right? Back on track. You remember the basement, don't you, boy? Eddie nodded and whispered, "Yes, sir." "Oh, I bet you do. You weren't meant for it, though. I'm starting to wonder if maybe that was more by design than by default. A man needs an heir, a protege. That potato head Donnie is out of the question. Maybe you could help me carry on this family tradition. In fact, yeah, in 2 days, you go down in the basement with me and watch the old man work. Now get on the bed. It's lights out. Patty, take Tina to her room and lock the door. Then send Kay to see me. I need a back robe." No sleep would come to little Eddie that night. Instead, he stared at the ceiling, the walls of his tiny mind grinding away. The wheels of his tiny mind grinding away, sorry. Several of their cogs were damaged, and sometimes the machine slipped and needed to be restarted, but he could still think. When the house had grown desolate and quiet, he slipped out the back. This little rat had work to do. He moved beneath a crescent moon. The scant light was barely enough to make the bottles shimmer, but he found them. Dozens, more than he'd ever collected in his life. He hid them amongst the tall grass of the vacant lot and slipped back into the house before the sun rose. Breakfast came and passed, cold cereal and silence. Patty nursed a hangover with a cup of coffee. Big Ed spent the morning in the basement. The ghostly notes of an old gospel record drifted up the stairs. Patty stood up quickly and made a beeline for the bathroom. Little Eddie assumed she was going to vomit, and he used the opportunity to slip out the back. He moved beneath the fiery titan that was the Texas sun, a tiny, insignificant rat with nothing to lose. He collected a stash of bottles and carried them to the corner store. The old man counted them and whistled. Whew, that's quite a haul, son. I guess you're going to want some candy to celebrate. Eddie shook his head and pointed to an object on a shelf behind the counter. No, sir. I'll take both of those, please. Later that night, he scrubbed the toilet clear of Patty's vomit while her and Big Ed drank in the living room. This was the eve of the offering, a night of celebration. Tina stayed locked in her room. Donnie and Kay clung to the shadows and tried not to draw the attention of their parents. The entire house reeked of ammonia. It stung Eddie's nostrils and made his eyes water, but it pleased him. He knew it would conceal the smell of his surprise. By midnight, the party in the living room wound down. Patty and Ed staggered to their room. Soon the sound of their snores held dominion over the silent house. Eddie slid off the mattress and tiptoed down the hallway. His tiny hand wrapped around a set of keys that dangled from a hook in the kitchen, careful to not let them jingle. He crept back down the hall once again, pressing his back to the opposite wall of the basement door. He could sense it stirring down there. He didn't think that thing ever slept, and he had to move fast. He unlocked the door to the little girl's room. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her tiny face a death mask of terror floating in the darkness. Eddie whispered, "We gotta get out of here, but you gotta be real quiet, okay? We gotta tiptoe out the back." The little girl softly nodded her head. Kay stepped into the doorway behind them. Eddie turned to face her and put one finger in front of his lips. She nodded her head. She didn't know what little Eddie's plan was, but she knew it was better than staying here. The three of them slipped into Donnie's room. Eddie gently nudged the boy awake. When Donnie's eyes opened, Eddie held up his pocket radio. He whispered, "Come on, Donnie. We're going to sneak outside and listen to the radio. We got to be real quiet so we don't wake up Big Ed or Patty, okay?" Donnie grinned and nodded. The children slipped out the back door and ran to the vacant lot. Eddie turned on the radio and handed it to Kay. Through the static, the song came through again. "Hot town, summer in the city, back of my neck getting dirty and gritty." Y'all listen to this. I'll be right back. Back in the house, little Eddie pulled the red gas cans out of the closet he hid them in and painted the walls with gasoline. He stopped in the hallway and splashed a heaping amount on the basement door. Then he moved towards Patty and Big Ed's room. The two of them lay drunk and snoring on the mattress. Little Eddie worked fast and silent. This little rat would surprise them all. Soon the floors were soaked. Vapors filled the air and shimmered in the darkness. Little Eddie plucked a cigarette from the pack Patty kept on her dresser, struck a match and lit it up. He took a deep drag that scorched his lungs. He liked the feel of nicotine. He tossed the cigarette on the bed and dropped the match on the floor. The tiny flame descended like the fiery corona of the sun as it dropped into the ocean. Little Eddie ran. He found the others in the vacant lot, still gathered around the soft crackle of the radio. Behind him, black smoke billowed from the house as flames danced at the windows. He could hear the screams of Patty and Ed, then silence. Part of the roof collapsed and fire leapt from the hole in gouts of red and orange. There was a bellow, something ancient and massive in a way that defied logic. It howled in a deep baritone grumble like the shifting of tectonic plates, the sound of a mountain being born or of a god dying. Eddie knew the thing in the basement was gone, but he also knew the thing in his head would never go away. I'm never going to say I can promise you he was right.
Who's having a fun, spooky time? I think we have like 3 people left to read, if I believe correctly, if I recall. Hold on. Ghoulish Books. This is Max. Well, I'm doing an event right now, but thank you. Who is this? The President of the United States from 2065? What do you want? Yeah, Michael Lewis Dixon is at my event. Why do you? He's actually filming the event right now, so I don't think he can speak. Oh, you want to ask him about what he's filming? Oh, this footage is why the universe is ending. Well, you can speak to him. This isn't really my thing. I'm just letting them use the venue and evidently hosting. So, but I wasn't supposed to host. That was Ryan's job, but he kind of made me do it. And now I'm just coming up with shit between each reading on the fly. But you can talk to Michael. Yeah, absolutely. It's just a bit. Come read.
Dixon. I do have a book up here called Sick. I was trying to come up with a news story, but I was working on my DVD, which I have, if anyone's interested in looking at it. Sphincter Qualm and Sherman Acres. This is this one's called the Alabama Embryo Babies. This is from the local news, and although it happened only a couple months ago, don't bother trying to look it up. This story has been suppressed. To protect the innocent, I'm changing the names. Only a few blocks away from here is the Urieta Baby Fertility Clinic. They needed somebody to come in after hours for housekeeping and basic maintenance. Not a bad $9.33 an hour gig. Let's call him Andrew Hellbent. He really needed the extra cash. The work was simple enough that he could do it with a hot dog in his hand. This is not a metaphor. Andrew just likes hot dogs and is often spotted holding one no matter what the situation. Andrew had been working there for several weeks and things were going pretty good. Everybody was happy. Then it was the end of summer and put that in there. Then the owners decided they wanted to have him strip and wax all the floors, but they needed another body in order to get the job done in just one night. Andrew called up his friend, who we'll call Zach Chapstick, to come give him a hand. On that fateful night, Andrew stress ate several hot dogs because Zach was over an hour late. He wasn't answering his phone or responding to texts. Just when Andrew was about to give up and start the job all by himself, in walked Zach. Andrew was fuming. The armpits of his t-shirt were wet halfway down his sides, and there were mustard and ketchup stains down his front. Andrew cussed out Zach, punctuating each expletive with a jab of his hot dog into Zach's face. Definitely not a metaphor. Come on, dude, Andrew said. We got shit to do. Cool, Zach said. I just gotta take a dump first. Several hot dogs later. All right, man. Andrew rolled his eyes. Can we get started now? I don't want to be here all night. Zach nodded his head, but then said, what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen here? Is it true that they have a machine that milks? He makes a jack off gesture, you know. No, Andrew snapped. That's only a myth. There is no milking machine. Except there was a milking machine, and Andrew was all too familiar with that device. He just finished cleaning it up after he put a hot dog in it earlier. This is in no way a metaphor. Yeah, sure, Zach said. Still, you've got to have something around here worth checking out. Come on, what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen here? Fine. If showing Zach this one thing was all it took to get him working, then so be it. He pointed his hot dog at Zach. Okay, there's this one thing that's pretty freaking weird. He walked over to a cool storage unit in the back and grabbed its handle. He smiled back over his shoulder and offered his hot dog to his friend. Again, not a metaphor. Andrew needed both hands for this task. He reached inside the unit and came out with a rather large test tube. Here it is. What the heck is that? Zach frowned. Are those embryos or something? This, my friend, is so much more than merely embryos. This here contains nothing less than Alabama embryo babies. Come on, you can't be serious. How the heck did they end up here in Texas? I am serious, Andrew said. You know, it was a typical inter-office fuck-up. They were supposed to go to another clinic in Alabama, but ended up here. No shit. Zach put the whole hot dog into his mouth and swallowed without pause. Not a metaphor, people. Then he shot out a hand and snatched the tube away from Andrew. Hey! Andrew shouted and tried to grab it back, but Zach spun away and moved out of reach. This is so dang wild. He held the tube up to the light and squinted. Do they look like sea monkeys? I had those when I was a kid. No, they are not sea monkeys. Stop goofing around. Give those back, Zach said in an announcer's voice. Making life in the palm of your hand. And he held the test tube up at waist level and tilted it and began jacking off the cylindrical object. Stop that, Andrew yelled. Give it back. He tried to grab it from Zach, but his friend jerked it away. Zach lost his grip, and the tube went flying over their heads. The two of them stood there frozen, with gaping mouths as the glass tube spun upwards and away. When it came down, it hit with a resounding pop. There was a flash of light and an explosion of pinkish-purple smoke, like a magician's disappearing act. The cloud quickly filled the space, leaving them blind, but it dissipated fast. From within the receding haze came gurgling and cooing sounds. Then wet things started to slosh across the floor their way. "Dude!" yelled Andrew. "Yeah, my bad," Zach said. 5 shapes moved in their direction. Zach stepped forward to check them out. Andrew pulled a hot dog out of his pocket. "Holy shit," Zach said. "They're babies." "Don't touch them," Andrew said around a mouthful of meat. "They're Alabama embryo babies." But it was too late. The things that should not be, but certainly were, moved a whole lot faster than any normal baby could. Zach spun around to flee, but one leapt through the air and grabbed his mullet in 2 tiny purple fists. "Get it off me!" Zach shouted. He tried to reach behind him, but Zach had been working out a lot, and while his arms were all strong as hell, they were too swollen he couldn't reach. Andrew stood there mesmerized and chewing. The Alabama embryo baby parted the mullet at the back of Zach's head, latched its mouth to his skull, and began to suck. For a moment, the room grew silent, except for the suckling sounds. Even the other baby things seemed to hush in observation. Zach relaxed. "Well, that feels weird, but it ain't so bad." Suddenly, his eyes flew wide as he screamed. There was a hollow pop, and his scream cut off. Zach's eyes sunk backward, leaving hollow sockets as the baby thing sucked out his brains. The creature ballooned with the cerebral ingestion, then squeezed itself back through the hole into the cavity of Zach's skull. That was it for Andrew. He turned and fled towards the front door. He only slowed to grab up his lunchbox and the remaining hot dogs. One of the creatures leaped and grabbed hold of Andrew's t-shirt. He fled the building, all the while slapping at the baby with a hot dog. This is definitely not a metaphor, because that would be very inappropriate. The rest of the Alabama embryo babies scooched off into the darkness. Zach and Andrew are both alive and walking around just fine these days. If you ask them about the Alabama embryo babies, they'll just laugh it off and shrug their shoulders. But there's something in their eyes that's more than just a glint of humor. It's infantile and malicious. The other creatures are still out there. So if you happen to hear a baby crying in the night, whatever you do not go and investigate. Go get a hot dog instead.
It's me, Max Booth. That didn't get any laughs. Holy shit, I'm bad at this. Max is doing something for me, so he told me to come out here and introduce someone. But unlike Ryan, who's supposed to host this, or Max, who has any idea what's going on, I don't know what's going on, so I'm just going to call on my friends to read. Rajay, come up here, Rondo.
Okay, so since this is about summertime, I'm going to ask that we please have some sympathy for the poor, desperate souls who are stuck in ice-cold classrooms with snacks and delicious chilled coffees during summer school. Higher education. Summer semester, week 1. I hope this class can fly under administrative radars and stay small. 8 students for a composition class is a perfect size. Hello, new colleagues. Welcome to our course. I won't bore you by reading our syllabus to you. You can read it on your own sometime before we meet again. Let's instead get started learning more about each other. Let's do some writing. No grumbles over the first icebreaker exercise. Hooray. This semester just might be my best ever. Summer semester, week 3. Good morning, colleagues. How is everyone doing today? Good, okay, fine, tired. Excellent. I'm glad the energy in here is so positive this morning. I'll need to borrow some of that while I try not to get frustrated over my car being hit from behind last evening. Oh no, are you okay, Professor? I placed my hand over my heart and performed a slight bow of gratitude. I'm okay, thank you for asking. My car's back bumper isn't, and my old joints aren't too happy about the whiplash, but slow driving and yoga are helping a lot. I looked over the classroom, about to take roll. I'm sorry for the gloom and doom this morning. Welcome to our newcomers. If you would, please hang around for a few minutes after class so I can get you caught up to where we are on assignments. So much for flying under the radar with a manageable class size, 2 new students. I guess the dean's admins didn't bother to email me to ask even if it was okay to place the students, since my class was so far below the maximum count. Are there any questions on our last discussion? Anyone besides our newest members? Low murmuring started. I knew there would be questions. I'll pass around the roll sheet while you all think a little bit. I gave them a few moments to compose themselves. Now, what questions do you have for me? Summer semester, week 5. Announcement. Course learning management system. Many apologies, my esteemed colleagues. I will not be able to attend class this week due to a minor injury I've sustained. I'm okay, but I have to rest for a few days. Please keep track of our discussions and assignments online. And if you need me, please feel free to text or email me. See you next week. Summer semester, week 7. Are you okay, Professor? Like, really okay? Yeah, we're worried about you. Yeah, first a car accident and then another injury. Their concern touched me deeply, and I was appreciative of working with such compassionate young adults. It does seem that I've had a pretty rough few weeks, doesn't it? I dimmed the front room lights and took off my sunshades, replacing them with my regular glasses. I really appreciate you all. I'm recovering now, but I have the best job in the world, working with the best people. I gave them a slight bow that didn't set my new headache off to higher heights. As long as we keep these lights down and speak quietly, I'll be okay. Now let's do some writing. The newest set of students who never said anything in class didn't join in the quiet applause. Summer semester, week 9. Time to take a long walk across campus to the dean's suite. An email wouldn't suffice for what I had to say. 4 more new students had been placed in my class beyond the halfway mark of the semester. There was no way to get them to the same point where the rest of the class was. This placement was a serious injustice to them, and I was dedicated to their success. I'd gladly fight this fight for them. Fernando, do you have any thoughts on this reading? The newer students were still quiet in class. I didn't typically call on students like that, but if I didn't call on these, they never raised their hands. A timid hand shot up. Okay, Fernando, not feeling it today? I pointed at the hand in the air, yes. Professor, who's Fernando? I wrinkled my brows and paused. Our colleague? You're not Fernando. You called someone else Fernando during the last class period too. I did? Several students nodded. Oh, I'm sorry. You all know I'm still recovering from that head injury. Thank you for your grace with an old woman. I pointed to Lucas again. You want to help us out on this reading, Lucas? Summer semester, week 11. The incessant headaches and blurred vision with regular bouts of dizziness after my fall made it difficult to do much more than just come into work each class day and go back home straight to bed. I'd fallen severely behind on grading assignments, and my anxiety stayed high worrying about catching up. My administration had been understanding of my current health situation so far, but I didn't want to push their benevolence. All I wanted was to feel better again, to help my students as best I could. 2 more new faces greeted me when I peeked into our open classroom door as I stepped into the room. They waved, chattering among one another. That was new, but I was glad they finally opened up some. My happiness over their social progress tanked when I realized I'd walked in on my dean speaking from the podium. Our counselors are here on campus if any of you need to work with them. I'm so sorry for our loss. I was busted. I opened my mouth to ask her if we could talk in the hall where I could explain myself. She gestured toward the door I just entered through. Professor Lawson will finish out the semester with you. Please join me in welcoming him. He stood at my podium. I just want to introduce myself and give my contact information. I'm working on getting your grades caught up in the system. We will take the rest of the week off to visit the counselors and try to process everything. Professor Thomas was a beacon of light for us all. I had never seen Professor Larson on campus. Fernando raised his hand for the first time that semester. Yes, Fernando, I whispered. We're ready to start class now, Professor. The group of students nodded in affirmation, and their light chatter drowned out that of the other students and their new professor. I cleared my throat. For the first time in weeks, my head was no longer pounding. I felt the excitement of sharing and learning and renewed energy course through me. I adjusted my glasses. The students always came first. Okay, let's do some writing.
One riddle left to go, but I just wanted to thank you all once again for coming out. This has been a lot of fun. Once Leticia is done reading, I am going to quickly grab a table and set it up. And everyone who performed tonight, you can come around. You can come in through the back office if you'd like. Grab a seat, and if anyone would like to buy a book and get it signed, you can do so. Please do so. But not yet. Leticia, come on, come do a reading. Read some cool stuff.
Yes, that's my book. Hi, I'm Leticia. I am going to read a story from my new collection that's going to be out from Undertaker Press in spring 2026. It's called it's a body horror collection called The Remedy is the Disease. So when I was told I had to read something summary, I was like, oh shit, I haven't written anything before this. So
What horrible assholes wants you to do that?
horrible. His name was Steve? No. So this one is actually a queer Lechuza story, but I think that owls often are like associated with the winter, but like in Texas, owls are year-round, like they don't migrate very much. And we have some very loud ones in our backyard, which was the inspiration for this story. So it's called This Night World. Turn the volume up. No matter that it was her third year of recording in the dark, crouching below oak and pecan trees, lifting her shotgun microphone higher. Every time Talia heard the telltale hooting of the male great horned owl and the answering screech of the female, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, her skin prickled. Adjusting her headphones only brought the ambient noise of the night closer to her conscious mind, like the world was pressing close around her, breathing against her skin. Talia swept her dark curtain of bangs out of her eyes and adjusted the huge padded headphones on her ears. They rubbed against the other side of her head, whose shaved fuzz was slowly growing back over the winding black vine tattoo snaking up her neck and behind her ear. She had been kneeling in the scrub brush for over an hour. The chill, the heat, we'll just revise that, creeped into her joints, her hands, her knees, her ankles. She wasn't as young as she used to be when she first started this work, but there was something thrilling about preserving the haunting call and response of the owls to listen back to and share with the ornithologists she worked with, as well as uploading to the conservation database that was shared with the local university biology students all the way to the elementary students too. The Avian Research and Conservation Institute had her out doing field work near a Central Texas wildlife preserve that was surrounded by a new housing development encroaching into the hills. Construction noises and children playing sometimes polluted the recordings But once deeper into the trees, Talia could hear more clearly the hooting in the waning light. She'd been out there almost every night for 3 weeks, patiently cataloging the calls for the small population of owls nesting in the preserve. More than one owl had died swooping in front of cars from the highway or were displaced from their roosting spots because of the construction. So it was nice to hear the calls of those who remained. Tonight, Talia had recorded a few good calls, including the screech of a female roosting nearby and the duets of a male and female, one pitching high and the other answering in a lower hoot, the call and response moving from tree to tree, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away from her in the darkness. In the twilight, Talia saw the black outlines of 2 owls sitting patiently on the same tree, one on the other upper branch, the other below, calling into the night. She hoped she would hear a female call that was always shriller and more piercing than the others. The last 3 nights she'd been sitting out here in the damp brush after a rain. This particular call came without warning. It wasn't responding to a male's hooting in the dark, but seemed to be coming through her headphones like a lost call all on its own. In fact, Talia noticed that every time she heard this female, the male calls in the vicinity fell silent. The high-pitched series of hoots finally came off to her left, and Talia walked in the awkward crouch around the bases of trees to get closer to the noise. One colleague used to say that you heard the right bird call through the headphones, and it shimmered. Talia hoped to capture some of that magic tonight. Her grandmother used to tell her and her brothers the story of the Leticia, the owl witch woman who would carry off kids who misbehaved, not listening to their elders. At her house in McAllen that ran up a creek, Grandma would tuck Talia in the twin bed with her younger brother Jorge. When they heard the telltale call of what Talia knew was a barred owl calling from the tree outside their window in that all too familiar, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for us all?" Grandma would pull the it doesn't actually sound like that. I don't know who made that up, but I really hate that. I know because we have 2 humongous barred owls that live outside of our house. Anyway, okay, I'm off on a tangent. Grandma would pull up the covers to their chins, reminding them to go to sleep. The Leticia catches little kids who don't go to bed on time. To hear her abuela tell it, if someone was bad enough, the Leticia could take their very soul. She knew a man who wandered around after getting drunk at the bar. He had wandering eyes, wandering hands, and would come home swaying and screaming at his wife and children. Sometimes he did more than scream. Walking back to his house one night, he heard the owl calling him, and in a fit of drunken rage began throwing rocks into the trees, searching for the call that tormented him. When his eyes finally met the Leticia, she swooped down and snatched them right out of his head. From then on, he never drank another drop, and his only wandering around town was to tell anyone who would listen about the witch owl who took his eyes. Jorge would cuddle into Talia's side and hide his head under the covers once their grandma went to bed, cocooning into the safe warmth of her armpit. But Talia would look out in the window, listening for the haunting call of the owl and the iridescent glow of its eyes. Now, when Talia sought out the owl, she thought of the Leticia stories from her grandmother and what a woman-turned monster could become. She asked her grandmother once where the Leticia came from. Was she a witch? Was she an owl? Was she a woman? She's both and neither. Leticias are what happen when a woman turns from God, from her duties as wife and mother, to a different life of evil and darkness. Later, Talia heard a recorded legend from Mexico of the Leticia, who was shape-shifted into an owl and became a vengeful spirit, taking revenge on those who wronged her in life. Her grandmother's emphasis on what a good woman was made her wonder if she ever wished she could sprout feathers and fly away from the cruel husband who ignored her and insulted her by turn. This was the same woman who told Talia when she turned 21 never to buy sex toys because they would ruin her for her future husband. Talia never found the heart or the courage to tell her that she had a girlfriend who had lovingly accompanied her to the sex shop to purchase their first strap-on. When she thought about it later, Talia felt sorry for her grandma. She never forgot her stories, though, if only because they come unbidden to her when she sat listening in the dark. Call me closer. There was the call of the lone female owl again from the trees to her left. After a few minutes of silence in which the other owl responded, Talia tried to mimic the lower, throatier hooting of the male owl. She started into the night, willing her human eyes to let the darkness in the way they let in the light. And that haunting call came in response, and Talia held her mic higher to get a quality recording. She mimicked the male call again, smiling wide when this lone female came closer than before. They went back and forth like that for a few minutes, call and response, though Talia knew she was compromising the recording with her own voice. A shadow darker than the night around her swooped over Talia's head, making 2 arching circles. It was closer to the size of a sandhill crane than an owl. The creature landed silently in front of Talia. It appeared as an owl with piercing yellow eyes until it unwrapped its rings around its body and began to grow. It spread and shifted, tawny wings revealing the full expanse of a body that matched the brown of her feathers that ran along her outstretched wings. When she lifted her head, the Leticia stared right into Talia's eyes with her yellow ones, shifting her wide hips and full thighs from side to side as if testing their weight on the soft, damp leaves covered around them. Their feet were not human toes, but huge tufted talons. Brown, yellow, and orange feathers covered her wings, chest, and the back of her head ended in 2 horned tufts on either side that Talia ached to touch. Her face was rounded with dark furrows that connected to a V on her forehead, and her lips were as black as an owl's beak. Leticia hopped and stepped across the ground towards Talia, who dropped her recording equipment on the ground and let her headphones dangle around her neck. The creature came within a foot of Talia, quirking its head from side to side and studying her features. Talia realized that the creature was backing her into a black walnut tree when her back hit the bark. She felt pressure building between her thighs, a slickness that made her already damp black jeans rub together. She wondered if the Leticia could smell her, was mapping out her body with its eyes. When she approached close enough for Talia to feel her hot breath on her face, the creature croaked, "Why did you call me?" "I didn't know I was calling you." The Leticia corked her head again, pressing against Talia's body, covering her with wings in a tight, warm embrace. Talia's eyes closed and she thrust her neck up towards the lips of the creature, a foolhardy thing to do to a famed predator, but the Leticia sniffed and nuzzled her there and along her chest. Talia felt both aroused and protected, but she kept her eyes squeezed shut as her abuela's voice flickered in her ear to protect her eyes and her precious soul. "You smell," the Leticia croaked, rubbing gently behind Talia's ear. She didn't finish the thought, and Talia found she didn't care, lost in the sensation of being appraised by the creature. "Do you want to go with me?" the Leticia asked. "Do you want to be mine?" With eyes still pressed tight, Talia stammered a yes into the cocoon of air between them. The Leticia ran her right wing down Talia's back like she was unzipping her. In the wake of this touch, Talia felt her nerve endings burst with fiery, prickling sensations, where feathers sprouted across the surface of her skin like she was a bag being turned inside out. The pleasure pain swept through her body, making her scream. The Leticia kept her cocooned, watching the transformation intently. Talia's arms flapped around her, and her back and arms were now covered in feathers as dark as her hair. Blood burst from her mouth where her teeth pushed themselves out by the roots, and hair fell from her head in soft clumps. Talia's features smoothed, extending, forming her mouth to a sharp brown point where she continued to croak and cry. Her tennis shoes burst at the toes where bright brown talons now steadied her, and Talia tested their weight, screeching into the night with her new owl voice. The Leticia, her new mate, hopped back on her talons and studied this new owl woman whose name didn't really matter anymore. She spread her wings up and wide, crouched so her new mate would know how to take flight. Their wing beats were slow, measured movements that gusted wind around them in soundless waves. Finally, they took flight and gave chase into the wild darkness. The director of the Avian Research and Conservation Institute found the abandoned recording equipment Talia had checked out days later in a preserve, cushioned by a tuft of soft, downy feathers. Playing back the recording, she heard a long duet between two female owls, call and response, fading in and out of range before taking flight to parts unknown.
All right, that concludes the readings. I'm going to get a table set up. If you prefer and you have books for sale, feel free to come around the back office, grab a seat and hang back. And everyone else, all for film those books we have on this round table, feel free to get some and get them signed.